Good evening, everybody. Welcome to LSR7's first speaker series event of the 2022 to 23 school year. My name is Katie Bergen, and I am a member of the PR team here for LSR7, and I'll be acting as your moderator for tonight's event. I'm going to speak for a little bit and allow folks some time to trickle in. We have a 6 to 7 p.m. virtual event planned for tonight. If you're new to the concept of the speaker series, this is a platform we launched late last spring to provide information for our school community about topics of high interest to parents. So the goal of the speaker series is also to provide this information in a format that's more accessible for our community from the comfort of your home. So we're pleased to share that we're going to keep on hosting speaker series events on different topics once a month for the rest of the school year. And so it's certainly a privilege, though, to kick off our school year by partnering with the Lee Summit Police Department to provide you information about a serious and important topic that impacts our community, the opioid crisis. We know that this is a topic that impacts our community and that it also impacts our young people. And we're looking forward to sharing information and resources with you tonight. So what to expect? We have 3 LSPD officers that you may know and recognize. They are the officers who have supported the district's DARE program and support our students and staff on a regular basis. We have Officer Beth Glover, Officer Amanda Gino, and Officer Larry Jones. And they developed this presentation on the opioid crisis just for our community and just for this event. So they're going to introduce themselves in just a little bit before they move through a presentation about the opioid crisis. When that presentation is done, we'll do a Q&A session that you guys all can participate in. So to participate, when it's time for questions, you're going to find that Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can submit a question for our panel at any time. However, we will save all the questions for after the presentation, and we ask that you keep your questions relevant to the topic at hand. We also want to be clear that this presentation is intended for an adult audience. While there's not graphic content, some aspects of this presentation may be difficult or disturbing, and so it's definitely for a more mature audience. So in a minute, I'm going to allow our police partners to introduce themselves, but first, in order to give our audience just a few more minutes to trickle in, I'd like to invite you guys to take a brief poll regarding how you heard about our speaker series event. So that poll should launch on your screen in just a few minutes. You can take a chance to, or take an opportunity to answer that for us. We would much appreciate that. Give you guys a couple of extra moments to take that poll. All right. Just in case you were wondering, we looks like our digital newsletter was a top way people heard about our event. So again, we're going to continue to have speaker series events on a monthly basis. So we hope we'll catch you next month as well. So without further ado, I want to pass it on to our police partners. I think Officer Larry Jones is first up. He's going to start our presentation for tonight. Officer Jones, it's all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, parents, teachers, and citizens. My name is Larry Jones, and I'm a police officer with the Lee Summit, Missouri Police Department. I've been employed as a police officer for 26 years. Most of those years I've been assigned to the uniform patrol. I've worked 5 years in an undercover capacity, 17 years SWAT, and I was certified as a drug recognition expert instructor. And currently I'm an impact officer, which is our former DARE program. As a parent myself and as an impact DARE officer in the schools, I commend you all for attending this virtual training on what is an extremely dangerous epidemic in our country and in our community, which happens to be International Overdose Awareness Day. Before I get started, I want to say one thing. This presentation was designed for adults, but we encourage you to speak to your children about what you learned tonight. And here's why. Studies have shown that an extremely high percentage of kids do not use drugs simply because they do not want to disappoint their parents. So those parents provided their children with expectations. In this slide, I want to discuss drugs. In the police world, we recognize 7 drug categories. We have central nervous system depressants, and those things are such as examples: alcohol, Valium, Xanax. Central nervous system stimulants, and those drugs are such things as cocaine, methamphetamine. Hallucinogens, which is LSD, mushrooms. PCP, phencyclidine. Inhalants, that's solvents, paint, whippets, and cannabis, which is marijuana. But tonight, the drug category we're talking about in opioids is a narcotic analgesic. And that's basically a painkiller, such as morphine, hydrocodone, Dilaudid, fentanyl, transdermal systems. If you've ever taken a pain medication, you might recognize some of the signs and symptoms that we'll discuss later in this presentation. Opium is derived from a poppy plant, and that opium is dried latex, and again, it comes from the poppy plant. Approximately 12% of the opium is made up of an analgesic alkaloid, morphine, which is processed chemically to produce what we commonly know as heroin and other synthetic opioids. Interestingly enough, Afghanistan produces 85% of the worldwide opium crop. Many of you may have seen this picture before. It's fentanyl, and it shows a penny compared to what amount, the small amount of fentanyl that could kill you. It's extremely potent. Synthetic opioid is 80 to 100 times stronger than morphine itself. Pharmaceutical fentanyl was developed for pain management for cancer patients, and also applied in the fentanyl patch to be put on the skin. Fentanyl is added to illicit drugs to increase their potency. So basically what drug dealers are doing is they're putting fentanyl into their drugs, it doesn't matter what kind of drug, to get more bang for their buck. And that's where we're seeing the overdoses from, because kids and adults are taking such things as counterfeit Xanax and finding that there's fentanyl in it, and they're overdosing. It's majority of the fentanyl is produced clandestinely in Mexico. Some of the street names that we have are listed here in this slide. China Girl, Chinatown, China White, Dance Fever, Goodfellas, Great Bear, He-Man, Poison, Tango and Cash. And in the picture you'll see on the far left vial is powdered heroin, and then it's compared to fentanyl on the far right, which doesn't take much to overdose or kill you, but carfentanil, which is in the middle, and carfentanil is 100 times more potent than fentanyl itself, and 10,000 times more potent than morphine. And from my understanding, carfentanil is used to sedate elephants. So simply touching this chemical can cause an overdose. And that's in our next slide. How it's used: you can inject it, snort it, sniff, smoked, orally by the pill or a tablet, like I've discussed before. And now it's also spiked into the blotter paper, kind of like old school LSD. So simply touching it, you can be affected by it. Fentanyl patches are abused by removing the gel or frozen and placed underneath the tongue or in the cheek cavity. And how does it affect the body? So like I said, if you've ever taken a painkiller, then you'll understand some of the side effects. You have relaxation, there's a pain relief, clammy skin, confusion, dizziness, maybe sometimes vomiting, constricted pupils, and I'll come back to that in a minute, euphoria, sedation, drowsiness, nausea, urinary retention, and respiratory depression. So in essence, you take too much of it, you go to sleep and you don't wake back up. But one thing to look for if you're on the alert, if you have kids that are of age that are maybe experimenting with things, is the eyes never lie. So most of the drugs that I've been experienced with, methamphetamine, marijuana, the pupils are going to be dilated really big. So the black area is going to be huge. However, when it comes to narcotic analgesic, such as opium, heroin, fentanyl, the pupils will be constricted, really pinpoint. So if you observe that, then you may be onto something. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Officer Glover at this point.
Good evening. I'm Officer Glover with the Lee Summit Police Department. And just to give you a brief background about me, I have been involved in law enforcement for 19 years. And during that time, I spent time in our public relations unit doing crime prevention education and program management for our community programs. And I also spent time in the intelligence unit working through crime analysis and intel and assisting in investigations. I just recently transferred to our DARE or Impact unit of January of this past year. And I really enjoyed my time in the unit so far and looking forward to addressing you all tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and speak to the local and national stats involving opioid abuse and the reason for the rise in overdose deaths within our country. I'm sure you've seen national news stories just like the one on your screen. This example helps you to grasp what we're dealing with. Just 21 pounds of fentanyl is enough to kill 4.7 million people. That's like wiping out the entire population of the state of Kansas, along with the KC metro area. So how did we get here? The problem began in the late 90s when pharmaceutical companies developed opioid pills like OxyContin. They told doctors the pills were not habit forming, even though they had the same chemical makeup as heroin, which is a highly addictive substance. Doctors began prescribing the powerful pain-killing pill to patients, and it didn't take long until people became addicted and started overdosing. So many people became addicted after taking prescription pills for back pains or other injuries. They weren't necessarily abusing the pills, they were just taking them the way the doctor prescribed. Then wave 2 in the epidemic, by 2010, doctors began limiting how many pills they would prescribe due to the widespread addiction issues. Pills on the illicit market became very expensive, so people switched to heroin when they realized they could get the same high for a fraction of the price. Then heroin overdose deaths skyrocketed. Then wave 3, by 2013, pharmaceutical companies were producing synthetic opioids like tramadol and fentanyl. These products hit the illicit market right around the same time. Easier and cheaper to produce than heroin, fentanyl is now laced into nearly all illicit drugs, just like Officer Jones had mentioned, mostly entering through the United States border with Mexico. This past spring, pharmaceutical companies began settling lawsuits brought against them by federal government and many of the states. Though none of these companies admitted or agreed to acknowledge any wrongdoing for their role in the opioid crisis, all of these companies chose to pay settlements out of court prior to litigation beginning, and they chose to pay out multi-billion-dollar settlements for damages to American citizens. So these funds will be divided between state and federal governments and used for addiction treatment programs and prevention. So in taking a look at local stats, you can see the KC metro region is hemorrhaging, especially when compared to the rest of Missouri. So between 2019 and 2021, the KC area saw a 68% increase in drug overdose deaths for people 15 to 24 years of age. And even more shockingly, a 149% increase in synthetic opioid deaths. This is fentanyl, obviously, to blame. So locally, the stories of lives changed by fentanyl are adding up. And you can see some examples on your screen. Counterfeit pills have saturated the KC illicit drug market. You cannot spot a real from a fake. The middle photo shows from the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, where the DEA is finding there is absolutely no difference between counterfeit drugs that are being produced, again, in Mexico and shipped to the United States, and what is truly being produced in the lab by pharmaceutical companies. So what are we doing to fight back here at LSPD? In 2019, we presented the first case of any Missouri law enforcement agency to charge a drug dealer with the death of one of his clients. The victim was 23 years old, and she died after overdosing on heroin that was laced with a lethal amount of fentanyl. The dealer himself was also an addict. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and is set to be sentenced this September. We continue to pursue dealers within our community, and Officer Gino is going to talk later about local resources available for families that are fighting addiction. So I have a few more slides for you on stats that paint a clear picture of what's happening specifically within our Lee Summit community. So from this slide, you can see in 2019, heroin cases spiked when pill cases dropped. And this is a relationship we've seen throughout the United States, throughout the opioid crisis. By 2020, counterfeit pills saturated the illicit market in Kansas City, and our recoveries of such have skyrocketed. Now, keep in mind, this graph charts cases. So these are actual police cases, not necessarily the total amount of pills or heroin or fentanyl recovered. So the actual amount recovered is much higher than what you're seeing on your screen, but the cases mentioned here might contain several lethal doses of each one of those illicit substances. So taking a closer look just at fentanyl recovered in the city of Lee Summit, we're set to more than quadruple our cases this year compared to what we saw in 2021. And this is just our 2022 year-to-date data. So this is now due to fentanyl being added to nearly all other drugs, including cocaine, meth, and sometimes even marijuana. So truly, as Officer Jones was saying, drug dealers are adding fentanyl to every type of drug out there. So I think a lot of times our teens and young people in our community think, well, I know not to touch fentanyl, but I just smoke weed, or I just do this, or I do pills. I don't do anything illicit or counterfeit. I only take real pills from a pharmacy. And that's just not the case with what we're seeing. We're seeing that fake and counterfeit pills have been laced throughout the market. So anything that they're getting a hold of could potentially be, carry a fatal dose of fentanyl. So our final slide takes a look at overdose deaths this year in the city of Lee Summit. So far, LSPD has responded to 5 overdose deaths in Lee Summit. 1 was caused by toxic fumes, 2 were from alcohol, and 2 were from fentanyl. Now, these numbers may seem few to some, but to the 5 families navigating the loss of a loved one, 1 is too many. And Officer Gino is now going to present on how to recognize an overdose and what you can do to help someone that may have an addiction.
Hello, my name is Officer Amanda Gino, and I have been with the City of Lee Summit for about 14 years. A few of the first years I spent on patrol, and then the last, I would say 9 or 10, I've actually been in the schools with R-7 as a SRO, school resource officer, and as a DARE officer. So like Officer Glover said, I'm going to talk to you about some signs of misuse. If maybe you're questioning someone in your life or someone in your family might be addicted to an opioid, these might be some good tips to look for. So like our slide says, it talks about excessive mood swings or hostility. So this isn't your normal, 13, 14-year-old mood swing, but these are very, very excessive, unnecessary kind of mood swings or hostility towards you or, other people. You might have somebody acting very like lethargic, so very sleepy, very foggy, just not really with it. Maybe they seem very, very confused, and just that's not a normal thing for them. So we're really looking for outside of their norm. Next, significant changes in sleeping habits. So this could be very little sleep, or it could be a lot of sleep. Again, that can change, in a young person, but these are pretty significant changes from what is their normal. Poor decision making. Again, some of these things, you think might be hard to tell, but we're talking like excessive poor decisions and extreme poor decisions. So this isn't like them. It's totally outside of their norm. This is a pretty easy one, requesting early refills or claiming to have lost prescriptions in order to get them rewritten. And these are going to be for your opioid pain relievers. That might be a sign that someone has an addiction and that they need it, they're wanting it, their body is telling them that they have to have it. So definitely something to pay attention to. Next, slurred speech. So this is something that we look for in law enforcement all the time. That usually kind of gives us a good indicator that they might be, under the influence of, something. And that just kind of starts us off into investigating that. Small Black pupils, like Officer Jones had mentioned, we're looking for those pinpoint, tiny little pupils. That's not normal. And that is the opioid making that happen. And then constantly feeling scratchy at the skin or feeling itchy. So that is a side effect from these opioids. If you've ever read your pain pill medicine, paper that comes with it, they list a lot of those side effects. So knowing those is important, but also seeing that in someone else might be a really good indicator that they might have signs of misuse. As well as just feeling or being disoriented or confused. We talked about that. Nausea, vomiting, so kind of unexplained nausea, vomiting. It's not coupled with maybe food poisoning or other things like that. And then feeling, having them feel flush, so looking flush, feeling flush, intense sweating, which is not normal. And then maybe unexplained hot flashes might be some more signs of misuse as well. So our next slide is talking about recognizing an overdose. So as you can see on the picture on the left, this is from the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. So just across the border, where they had seized 6,000 counterfeit prescription pills containing fentanyl, as well as firearms and other drugs as well. So they want, in this article, they wanted you guys to know that it's 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine. And those are morphine, something that we, are prescribed at times from the hospital or doctor. So they also talk about signs of overdose that we just talked about. So a person's lips immediately turning blue, which is an indicator of lack of oxygen and blood flow to the body. Gurgling sounds when breathing. So not your typical snoring, but more of that gurgling sound. That's absolutely not normal and could be a sign of an overdose. Stiffening of the body, so very stiff, kind of unusual posture if someone appears to be overdosed, or even seizure-like activity. So maybe that shaking, very just stiff arms, those kind of things. Foaming at the mouth. This is one that's usually pretty common with overdoses. It might not look like they see it on TV, but it might be very slight, but usually foaming at the mouth is not normal. And then confusion or strange behavior right before they lose consciousness. So they start saying weird, odd things, and they just maybe look really, really confused, and then they might pass out from there. And then on the right, we have two pictures, and these are not indicative of anything in Lee Summit, but these are pictures that taken of the same couple, same situation, where these two have appeared to overdose on fentanyl. And as you can see, they just don't, that doesn't look normal. That's not a normal, I took a nap in a car. They are completely passed out, mouth open, very weird posturing. And unfortunately, there is a kid in the car as well. We just kind of wanted you to have just some signs of an overdose if you were to find that. We also wanted to mention that Missouri has a Good Samaritan law, and this is going to protect people that call 911 from an arrest or any kind of prosecution for possession of these drugs or paraphernalia. All right, so here's a just kind of a picture for you of signs of opioid overdose. If you want, you can go ahead and take a screenshot picture of that, take a picture of it, so that way you have it. But again, it's just talking about those pinpoint pupils, unconsciousness, shallow or slow breathing, pale skin, so losing the color in their skin, those blue lips, and then that snoring, rasping, kind of gurgling breath, if you will. So if you find somebody in this, it doesn't have to be anybody you know, but if you're out at a restaurant, in the restroom, something like that, and you see somebody experiencing these kinds of signs, I would definitely be calling 911 immediately. We also have on there a few pictures of things that we use to revive people and bring people back from an opioid overdose. That top picture of Narcan nasal spray is actually what the brand that we carry for the police department. So we're carrying that not only for use if we experience a fentanyl exposure, but also if we're coming across people that have a fentanyl overdose. The other two are carried more by your medical providers. And those are used, again, to bring people out of that overdose, as long as they're given within a reasonable amount of time. And then lastly, we wanted to talk about some prevention resources. So like Officer Jones said, talk to your children. Make this a common thing that you're talking to your kids. So you yourself learn about drug facts and their health effects. So know your information ahead of time. Ask your kids open-ended questions. So ask them, hey, have you heard about people doing drugs around your school or around the neighborhood? If so, what drugs are they using? And remind them that they're not going to be in trouble. They're not going to be punished. And you are sincerely just asking them questions and really wanting to know what they're dealing with and what they're kind of having to go through and what they're hearing. Talk about healthy lifestyle choices. So medication misuse is a health issue. It's not a discipline or a behavior problem. And I know that sometimes doctors like to hand out a lot of prescriptions. Just because you're given that prescription doesn't mean you always have to take it, especially when it comes to pain pills. And so if your child's doctor does prescribe an opioid pain reliever, and you might be worried about that addictive property, I would ask for a non-opioid or a non-addictive alternative. And they can and should be able to provide that for you. And that's just really you looking out for your child, because that addiction can happen faster than we even realize. Next thing you can do is remove all non-used prescription opioids from your home. So all of those pain pills and prescriptions that you've been given if you have a surgery or a procedure, a lot of times we fill it just to have it, and then maybe we use one or two, and then we just put it back in the shelf in the medicine cabinet. We want to make sure that we're getting rid of those and getting those out of the house, so that our curious children or children's friends, don't find that and use that as an option to take drugs. So we have our drug take back event through Lee Summit, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. And then many local pharmacies will do drug takebacks as well. So that might be something that you just might have to Google in your area or when they are. We also have a few resources, partnership to end addiction. So there's a parent resource guide for teens and tweens. So you can see that website there. Again, you can take a screenshot of that if you want to keep it. And then there's also a 5-minute survey about is your child at risk for substance misuse? So that might be a good little survey if you think that your child might be at risk, or honestly, if you're just really curious. I don't think that would be a waste of your time at all. And then last but not least, we have our local partners. So through the police department, we work with Rediscover. They can help with a lot of things, addiction, mental health, you name it. So they're always a good resource. And then we have the Safe Passage program at our police department. We created this program specifically to help with people that have addiction. So people can come and essentially kind of turn themselves in, hand themselves over to us, asking for help, asking for, a place to go and someone to, help them deal with this problem. And that's free of accusation, anything like that. So that's always a good program that we have at the police department. We work with Jackson County Combat. They are an anti-drug tax that you pay. And so a lot of our resources come from them. Obviously, we're with Lee Summit Police. And then we have NAMI, which is our National Alliance for Mental Illness. They can help with any of that mental health issues as well. And then that's our Dare and the Lion. So that's our program that we've been teaching a lot of your students to stay away from drugs. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Officer Gino, and thank you, Officer Glover and Officer Jones. We are going to transition to the question and answer part of our program. And so I encourage you to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit a question to our officers. I do have a question for Officer Gino to get us started. I believe you addressed it, but is Lee Summit Police Department, are you issued Narcan? And it sounds like you are from a little bit earlier in your presentation.
Yes, and it's always a battle to make sure that we have one on us every time we're using it, replacing it, making sure that they're up to date. But yeah, it is for both our sake, in case we're exposed to it, and anybody that we come across.
Excellent. Our next question is for Officer Jones. When is a good age to start talking to my child about drugs or opioids?
What would you guys say? I mean, we teach second, fourth, and fifth grade. I wouldn't hesitate speaking to a fourth grader about any kind of substance abuse, because what we talk about is, when I talk to kids in school, I ask them the question, are all drugs bad? And immediately they'll say yes. And then some of them kind of back off and say, well, hang on a second. My doctor gives me drugs when I'm sick and I need a medication. And so they're kind of already informed about drugs. There's good drugs and bad drugs. But nowadays, some of those good drugs, a friend or a family member could have laying around. It could be a counterfeit, and we don't want them to take that. We want them to understand. So I would say fourth grade. Would you guys agree with that, or a little bit later?
Yeah, I think fourth grade's an excellent time, and be age appropriate kind of about the drugs that you talk about. I don't know if they're going to understand opioids in fourth grade,
Right.
But they might understand, we get prescription pills from the doctor and they need to be for us and us only. They might understand about tobacco, people smoking. Most fourth graders think smoking is gross, so fourth grade, definitely a good starting point. Just be age appropriate. And again, just talk to your kids, ask them what they know. And then kind of, rate how you talk to them about what they know or what they've heard.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because asking them what they know and those open-ended questions is a great way to start the conversation. And then that just kind of naturally flows from there. So if they say, I don't know anything, I've never seen or heard anything about drugs in my school, I don't know what you're talking about, then maybe you just launch into a very simple conversation about, we only take our own medicine and what dosing is and what that looks like and why it's important to have an adult with you and have an adult give you that medication and not take it from others, and even with younger kids, you might not necessarily be talking about drugs, but you could be talking about what's safe to eat, what's not safe to eat, what's safe to take medication wise, and what's not safe, and kind of put those parameters and rules in place early and often. So it's not just one conversation. This needs to be an ongoing conversation. That's something that you talk about on a regular basis.
Kind of in line with that question, is there an age that you guys think that our young people start to be more at risk as far as exposure to opioids? And are there any trends or commonalities to, how young people are first exposed to that drug?
I would start to say, middle school really is kind of a game changer when they're coming out of that elementary setting. And now we have our middle school, 6th, 7th, 8th. So you have a good age difference. And so middle school is really when they're starting to maybe hear about it. They may not have seen it yet. They may have not known what they've smelled or what they've encountered. But middle school is really that game changer time. And then obviously as they get older, they gain the more knowledge about those opioids and those, a little bit more dangerous drugs. So unfortunately, middle school, it starts early. Do you guys know anybody trends or?
I'll tag into that. Just informational, like a game changer, like Amanda Gino just said, technology is a game changer. So what we're finding is drug deals are taking place on Instagram and Snapchat primarily. So be aware of that.
Yeah, unfortunately, social media probably is definitely a game changer for kids nowadays to find out about it, learn about it, and then have more access to it. I know we've had a few cases like that recently where it took place on social media. So be watching your children's social media. Having a phone is a privilege, not a right. Being on social media is a privilege, not a right. Make sure you have access, you have their accounts, you have their passwords, and you're constantly checking it. Taking away phones at night, probably a good idea. That's when we've seen that a lot of kids are maybe getting themselves into some situations that they don't need to be in. So really just kind of start to take charge and teach them how to be appropriate with social media. It's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. But we can teach our kids how to be social media appropriate.
Another question. Do you believe dealers are targeting kids with fentanyl-laced products, or is most of the time it's accidental contamination?
Oh no, it's intent. Very intent.
It's intentional in my opinion, my experience from coming across the border. It's intentional. However, some of the local dealers may not know because they didn't manufacture it. They just purchased it and are distributing it for their money. So there's an intent behind it, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily local per se. However, the one gentleman that Officer Glover mentioned, he knew about it and he didn't care. He continued to distribute, and it ended up taking the life of at least one person.
Yeah, I saw in the news right before I came here about rainbow fentanyl pills. And I'm like, okay, what adult cares about something being rainbow or pretty purple or, pink? And who cares about that? Kids care about that. So to me, I can't help but to think that at some point it is intentional.
This question is for all of you, or any of you. What's a common question kids are asking you in the classroom about this topic?
So kids want to know if these things are bad for us, especially when we talk about the pharmaceutical companies and the lawsuits that recently came down this past spring. They want to know, well, then why is this allowed? Why is this happening? Why are people doing this? If they know it's bad for us, why are they targeting us? And, unfortunately, it's the world that we live in, and we do try to help work through that with them and help them to think critically and really examine all sides of this problem, and look at the aspect of addiction. We look at the aspect of who's making money and why they might want to ensnare a 12 or 13-year-old in addiction with the payoff of having them become an addict and being a user for life. And so those are the tough questions that kids are asking, is why are adults allowing these harmful drugs and harmful chemicals on the market?
Yeah, a lot of kids, I mean, just ask basic questions about if alcohol is so bad, why is it legal? If marijuana, has so many issues and why is it becoming legal? And it's a really hard, answer, and so we just tell them that, people have a choice, and that's our job, is to educate them on the realities and what your good choice and your bad choices can do. So that's kind of our take on teaching, is just educating them and teaching them to hopefully make some responsible and healthy decisions.
Officer Gino, the next question is for you, so I'll go right into it. You mentioned one of the proactive measures that a family can take or a parent can take is to actually remove drugs that aren't being used anymore, that have been prescribed out of the home. So could you tell us a little bit about those drug take back events in Lee Summit? I know you mentioned them.
Yeah, so we usually have 2 a year. We do that through the DEA, so we partner with them. We usually have one in October in the fall, and then one in the spring, usually in April. And so we usually try to publicize that, and that might be something we can work with the school district too, to publicize it a little bit more. We try to usually do it on our social media, signs, you name it. And so we'll have a station at the Lee Summit Police Department. We have a station at the Lee Summit Medical Center, and then John Knox Village. And then sometimes we'll have another location as well. And it is easy as can be. You can drive up. You don't even have to get out of your car half the time. And a lot of people bring us the pills and they take the labels off and all their private information. Some people take the pills and dump it in a plastic baggie. Some people just clear out the medicine cabinet and throw it in a bag and toss it in the bin. No questions asked. We don't care who, what, when, where, how, why. But it's super easy, super convenient. So you can just drop those off. And we usually post our hours as well. And then we just seal everything up. I don't look at it. I don't remember anything. We seal it up. And then we're there in uniform guarding it the entire time. And then we release that over to a DEA agent, and then they're disposed of properly. I know 2 times a year is not always convenient. So if you want to go on the DEA's website, they can usually share a little bit more information that if you can't get it to a take back or your pharmacy isn't participating, they give you some tips and ideas to get rid of those pills, and how to do it without hurting our environment as well. So the old school way of flushing it down the toilet is not a good idea anymore. We know that our water, that gets into our water system. So they give you some tips and tricks to properly dispose of that if you can't get to one of our take backs.
Excellent. Officer Glover, the next question is for you. Where can we get Narcan training, and is Narcan offered for free anywhere?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure on that one. That's definitely something that we would have to get back with you on, unless one of you guys know.
I did a little research on it, and I believe in the state of Missouri, you can purchase it over the counter. And I wasn't clear if you can do that in Kansas. And I would imagine they would have an instruction pamphlet included with that, or a YouTube video, but I don't know about a certified instruction location or training for that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's available at your local like drugstores, and so that might be just an easy call to CVS, Walgreens, your doctor or family doctor to have that. And I don't think there's a whole lot of instructions on it. Normally, it is just a nasal spray, so you're just inserting it. It is one of those things where if you thought it was an overdose, an opioid overdose, and you gave it to them, it's not going to harm them. It's not going to cause any more issues. That's usually a big proponent of people that don't want to touch it. So it's not going to harm anybody if you misdiagnosed, an overdose or not. But yeah, definitely a good CVS, Walgreens pharmacy question, but I do believe that it is available.
We have a question about, does LSR-7 keep Narcan in our health rooms, or does it have to come from the school resource officer? I can answer that and let you know that all of our nursing rooms have a supply of Narcan in them. And so I don't know if you guys also carry Narcan, but maybe you could speak to the school resource officer piece.
We're issued Narcan, so typically all of us are going to have it on us. But that's nice to know that LSR-7 nurse's office have that. I learned something today. So
Switching gears a little bit for Officer Jones, can you talk about marijuana psychosis becoming a problem because of high levels of THC?
Wow, changing gears. Yeah, and a sensitive topic too. Well, we've been researching the marijuana craze lately because of the legalization of medical marijuana and what we believe is soon to be recreational use in the state of Missouri. So we want to be in front of it. And just basic off the top of my head, the marijuana of the 70s, 80s was around 3% THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, and that's the psychotic portion of it that people use typically, smoke marijuana for that psychosis, psychoactive, ingredient. And now that marijuana that has grown is up to 23, 25%. That's just for the leaf. And now we have the waxes and the dabs that are the synthetic THC that is up to 99%. And it's very common in the middle schools to find THC vapes. Kids will go into the bathroom, they hit the vape, and they're blitzed. And it's hard to detect. It's easy to conceal because the smoke dissipates rather quickly. And they come out of class and they're pretty much bombed. And to try to get back to answering the question, I personally know some psychiatrists that I've talked to, and some of the research that I've done, that there is schizophrenic type, what am I trying to say? Behaviors that are associated with this high THC content. And it's very, very concerning.
You touched on this a little bit in a previous answer, but we have a question asking any of you to discuss the impact of social media, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and how that intersects with this epidemic.
Social media and police work has been good for us, but it's also causes us a lot of work. But we're also able to find out a ton of information because everything's being documented, even if they believe that it's not being documented. Social media is, like I said earlier, it's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. There are new apps, new ways to be on social media being created every day. And so really just learning to embrace it. If you are allowing it in your household, I know a lot of parents that, their kids have to be a certain age, and they think that they can mentally and emotionally be able to handle social media, because it can be a lot. It can be a lot for our kids. And then, if you're allowing it in your home, again, monitoring it, and not allowing them to have private access to those social media without your ability to be there, without your ability to watch, without your ability to interject. And then, we're constantly trying to teach, students how to be appropriate, right, on social media. You can use it to talk about what you did for the weekend and how happy you are and all these great, wonderful things. And you can use it to be completely honest that you're upset or you're sad. But we try to just teach kids to make good decisions on social media and know that it's always being recorded, no matter if it's Snapchat and they think that it goes away. We've had several cases where it's been an issue on Snapchat and we've had to bring in phones, computers, Chromebooks, and download them and have Snapchat and whoever we were dealing with give us all the records, unfortunately, from those conversations that aided in our investigation. So all of that stuff does not go away. Like I said, you can use it to help. You can also use it to hurt, and it can cause a ton of issues with your kids. Do you guys have anything with social media?
I think just to add that, we are seeing kids buy and sell drugs on social media, so it's something to be aware of. And just like, any other time in history when young people have experimented with drugs, we're still seeing the same thing, but now just through social media. So it's really important, like Officer Juno said, to be monitoring those platforms and really to be thinking twice as to whether or not your children even need social media. I think the big thing to remember is the majority of the CEOs and the owners of these major corporations that manage social media platforms, whether it's Twitter or Telegram or any of the others, if you sit down and speak to them, like many people in the news media have, they'll be the first to admit that they don't even let their older teens, 17, 18-year-old teens, have access to these platforms. So there's something that they know about their own product that is very addictive and is very detrimental to mental health and very dangerous to young people's minds and bodies that are still growing. So I think that speaks a lot to just the dangers in general.
And I'll add one thing to that, to the parents out there. Even if you don't allow them on social media, text messaging, you can do some research. There's certain emojis that are communicating drug purchases or drug usage as well. And I can't verbally explain that. You have to look it up, see the pictures.
We have a tough question. What are the youngest ages you've seen young people using opioids or exposed to opioids?
I don't think off the top of my head, do you know any?
Yeah, I don't personally know any age. I'm trying to think of what's been reported.
I know we've had, not necessarily in Lee Summit, but I know that we've had local cases as young as 12 where there have been overdoses as young as 12. And I think that's part of the danger is, it's hard to wrap your mind around how does this happen, especially when you're looking at kids that young. But I think one thing for parents to remember is, alcohol is a drug that's very accepted within our society. And even though the drinking age is 21, we often find that teens are experimenting with alcohol and maybe other drugs that they might consider, a lighter drug. But what happens, we see oftentimes teens experimenting with alcohol, and when they're inebriated and they're not making good choices and they're at a party and somebody offers a pill and says, oh, it's no big deal, I got this from my mom's medicine cabinet, or I stole this from my grandma, she had him after her hip surgery, or whatever the case may be. They're easy to get this medication and then they make poor choices because they're already inebriated. And unfortunately, one time may just be the only time, and that's when we see those overdoses or a starting point for addiction.
We're almost out of time, but I do want to ask one last question. We have some questions about, mental health struggles or self-esteem issues, and maybe some reasons that maybe would prompt someone to turn to drugs as a problematic coping mechanism. And so could you speak to the positive coping mechanisms that you teach our students or talk to them about through our DARE program and soon to be our IMPACT program? What things do you tell them to empower them to choose alternative ways of managing some of their struggles?
So first, it starts with us explaining to them that their brains and bodies are still growing. Once we give them all of the facts about what drugs and alcohol do to their systems, especially to their systems at such a young age, we also talk to them about the happiness or the feel-good chemicals in the brain and how dopamine, how flooding your dopamine receptors can actually lead to later addiction. And we explore that in depth with our 7th grade students, and we just kind of scratch the surface and lay the groundwork with our 5th graders. So from there, we also talk about stress management. We talk about positive, healthy ways to manage stress and to manage emotions. We also talk about managing conflict. We do a lot of role plays and skits with the kids, which they absolutely love. And it's just a great opportunity to help them work through problem solving, especially when they get into risky situations.
Yeah, and I think nowadays we're quick to want to medicate. Oh, you have this problem, here's medication. You have this problem, here's your medication. So we really try to just teach kids the basic fundamentals of, dealing with life, right? Life is hard. Life is not going to get any easier. And we're trying to teach them to just make those good decisions. Stop what you're doing. Think about what your issue is, what your problem is. How can I handle this? Okay, I can probably handle it in a really good way, and not so okay way, and then a really bad way. And then think about the choices of those outcomes. How's this going to go? How does this look for me? And then hopefully come up with a really good decision to make. And we have kids that are medicated because of many reasons. And so taking another pill might not be a big deal for them. And so unfortunately, with that mental health crisis, you have, the norm of taking pills. And so I think that plays into it too. But we're really trying to, stress the kids to make those decisions. Don't be rash, which sometimes they can because their brain is still figuring out life. And really just kind of stop and think about those choices.
We recently interviewed some of our teenage youth court participants on that very topic. And interestingly enough, they claim that a lot of their high school friends were turning to drugs simply out of boredom, nothing else to do. And their other friends are doing it. Not a real thick layer of peer pressure, but it was just out of boredom, which surprised me. In our impact program, all of us on the team, there's 4 of us, we all eat healthy, we all work out. And so we also incorporate that as a positive aspect in our program of things you can do. So that's one example there.
Excellent. Well, Officer Glover, Officer Gino, and Officer Jones, I can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge with us. We're so grateful and lucky that you are in our district working with and supporting our students and our staff. For anyone who may have missed some of this presentation or simply wants to watch it again, we do process this video and caption it and put it on our YouTube, so you will be able to access some of this information again. But I want to just thank you guys for your time. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you that you would send everyone off with? Put you on the spot. I didn't tell you I was going to ask you that one.
No, I don't think so. I think we just want to make sure that we're really grateful to all the parents that tuned in tonight and to those that are going to watch online later. We appreciate your support and your willingness to learn. And if there's ever anything that we can do for you or any other questions that we can answer, please feel free to reach out. We absolutely love sharing your children with you. We love being in the school district and teaching. It truly is the highlight of our careers. It really is. We've all gotten to do some really amazing things at the police force throughout the years. We all have a lot of experience, but being in the classroom, being with kids, and again, just trying to make an impact on their lives for the positive is the most rewarding part of our job. So we love it and we thank you guys.
Excellent. We're lucky to have you here in LSR7. Thank you to all of you at home who tuned in tonight. We hope you tune in to our speaker series next month, and we hope you have a pleasant evening. Take care.